My name is Casey Studer, and for my special education law case study, I was provided with CJN versus the Minneapolis Public Schools System. A brief overview of the case. This case could be found in the U.S. Court of Appeals in the 8th Circuit. The plaintiff during the case was the student, which was CJN. However, he was represented by his guardian mother, SKN. And the defendants were the Minneapolis Public Schools, specifically Special School District Number 1, the Minneapolis Board of Education, Catherine Treves, who is the chair of the board, and finally Carol Johnson, who is the school's superintendent. Moving ahead, an overview of the case. CJN was a third grade student at the time. He was currently placed in a special school environment, mainly due to his classroom behaviors. CJN did have lesions on his brain and had a very long history of psychiatric illness. Even though he did have behavioral difficulties in the classroom, he was still progressing academically at an average rate in accordance with age-appropriate peers. Unfortunately, during his third grade year, CJN's behavior began to escalate. Staff began to provide him with more and more timeouts and short restraints. Overall, while the restraints did average for less than a minute, there were 5 reported cases in which the restraints had lasted for 5 minutes or more. Mom had prompted the school and said that you need to be doing something about this. The school responds back by saying that they have many positive behavioral interventions in place. They're constantly being monitored, and they're also constantly being adapted and changed in order to help meet CJN's specific needs. Unfortunately, CJN's mother expressed these concerns continually, and eventually she unilaterally decided to enroll CJN into a private school. So the key positions on this case were the plaintiff, who said that CJN was not provided FAPE, and thus all of the private schooling that he was going to receive had to be reimbursed. The lack of FAPE was mainly due to 2 key areas. The first was a lack of overall behavioral interventions, and finally that this child was subject to too many restraints and also prolonged timeouts while at school. The defendant on the other side, the Minneapolis Public School System, said that even though they were restraining the kid, the student was still progressing at a very appropriate rate. That the special education teachers were providing a good faith effort with positive behavioral interventions. And finally, by saying that the restraints and timeouts, unfortunately, were just simply necessary in order to help provide a safe learning environment for all the students and the staff members. So, the applicable laws here, the first issue was the positive behavioral interventions. After taking a look at both sides of the case, the court concluded first that specific results are not required. That when you are working with a student with behavioral goals, with academic goals, while you can provide benchmarks for them to try to reach, you cannot expect very specific results from that kid. Essentially, your mileage is going to vary here a little bit. The second one was the focus on the positive behavioral interventions. The judge went and determined that, in fact, the school, as mentioned again below, was genuinely providing a good faith effort toward this student in particular. That on occasions when the kid was supposed to get suspended, they were very lenient with those expectations to try to maintain that student in the classroom environment. That he was provided a wide variety of different academic and behavioral accommodations to help try to continue to promote a safe and successful learning environment. The second issue was the restraints and the timeouts. Again, the court concluded on the side of the school district. First, stating this idea that it met the standards of the state education agency. Essentially, within this code, the judge decided that it was essentially up to the educators to determine whatever methodology they felt was appropriate to help provide that student with the academic and the behavioral supports that they need. The second piece was the encouragement of the development of a behavioral intervention plan, or a BIP. Again, in the past, the special education teachers and the school district had proposed that this student, CJN, receive a behavioral intervention plan to help address and to help provide a continuum for when these escalated behaviors were to occur. Unfortunately, Mom took a look at this idea of having this behavioral intervention plan, and she continued to dismiss it time and time again, saying that it was outrageous, it was unnecessary, and it was something that she was not going to approve for her son to have. The final issue comes back to this idea of being reimbursed due to a lack of FAPE. Again, the court concluded on the side of the school district. First, the judge follows in by talking about how FAPE reimbursement is supposed to work. The judge decides and says that if there was that lack of FAPE, the school absolutely is supposed to be held responsible for providing the necessary reimbursement for that kid to go where a district can provide them with FAPE. However, again, citing back to those two main arguments, the first one that the school genuinely, again, was providing behavioral interventions and was showing a good faith effort toward providing the student with the necessary behavioral and academic accommodations to help be successful. The second piece, again, falls back into that state education agency standards, saying that regardless of whether or not the parent likes it, if we allow these teachers to utilize methodologies that they feel are working and are successful for the student, we have to allow that district that opportunity to utilize those different supports and services. So, the final decision overall was that the judge did in fact affirm the original court district decision. He states that the private school reimbursement got denied as the Minneapolis School District had provided the necessary positive behavioral intervention supports, and that the restraints and timeouts did not deter CGN from having an appropriate and academic growth. So my personal response on this, I'm in favor of what the judge decided. One key bit of information here that I want to discuss is this idea of the student behavior and human response. A lot of the time when we see students acting out in an educational environment, we think that it's within their realm of control, they're doing it to gain attention, they're doing it to escape things, when the harsh reality is that many of these behavioral disorders genuinely require a heavy amount of intervention, a heavy amount of support, sometimes medication, and that a lot of these kids can get out of control in these times, and we need to be able to have the necessary supports in place, such as seclusion, such as timeouts, such as restraints, in order to help protect the students and the staff of the school. The second aspect here is this idea of a good faith effort and adequate results. When we're working with special education students, while we want to provide as many opportunities for classroom success as possible, the harsh reality of it is that so long as we as special education teachers or we as general education teachers are making that effort toward providing these students with what they need to be successful, that we have to be okay with whatever results we end up getting so long as they're adequate in terms of progress. The two key areas I focused in here with the IEP team was first the development of the BIP. I think that this was one of the key pieces that was missing from the Minneapolis side of the argument, that parents are a part of the IEP team and they need to be a part of that process, and the school needs to try to show how important that BIP is in terms of a continuum of responses for their student. If mom was having a difficult time with this idea of timeouts and this idea of restraints, having a BIP would provide them with the opportunity to engage in additional supports that mom can help be a part of approving, and we can have that idea of restraint at the very end as that absolute end, that ultimatum, we absolutely have to use it. And the second piece is this idea of developing these positive behavioral interventions for psych services. Clearly, CGN has a number of psychological disorders that need to be addressed. It's the IEP's team responsibility to work with mom to help provide these overall levels of support so that CGN is both supported at school and academic and behavioral realms. So the implications for leaders. First and foremost, Student behaviors can be explosive and can be very dangerous for students and staff alike. What types of contingency plans are going to be put in place? Whether you choose to side with restraint and seclusion or side against restraint and seclusion, the big thing here is that there genuinely needs to be a plan put in place to deal with these things. They're going to happen, and you need to be able to have an idea. You need to have those supports, those protocols in place in order to help maintain safety of all members of the school. The second piece, just coming from a personal standpoint, these behavioral positions are very difficult to fill. It's extremely difficult to find behavioral interventionists. It's very difficult to find para associates that are willing to take $8, $9, $10 an hour to work with a kid that's going to be explosive on a daily, bi-daily, or a weekly, whatever basis. Those are positions that you need to be able to know how to fill and be able to manipulate and move staff around in order to make sure that these positions are being supported. Last but not least, document, document, document. Whenever you're dealing with students with behavioral disorders, whenever you're dealing with restraints, seclusion, you need to be aware of all of these supports that you're providing, and you need to be gathering data on all of these pieces, because when you're talking about seclusion rooms, talking about restraints, talking about timeouts, talking about charges, the more data you have that helps you to drive to make those decisions, the better your decisions are going to be.